Leaders love the thought of innovation, but what they hate is the thought of risk aversity and everything that comes with it.
Hello, my name is Shirley Kavanagh, and you're very welcome to the Leadership Discoveries podcast. And here I chat with leaders and experts across a variety of sectors and geographies who share their experience and views on a range of leadership topics. And today I'm delighted to be joined by Jill Ellul. Jill has over 30 years' experience in the pharmaceutical industry, and she's also founder of Mojoco. And Mojoco is a business consultancy that offers innovation-led solutions to the pharma, medtech and biopharma sectors. And I know this will be a very interesting conversation because Jill is going to talk about all things innovation and creativity. Jill, you're very welcome.
Hello, Shirley, and thank you so much for inviting me onto your fabulous podcast. I'm delighted to talk about a topic that I'm so passionate about. So thanks for the opportunity.
And I'm so glad you joined me because I know this is a topic that people talk to me about all the time, actually. I'm very interested to hear some of your thoughts around this. But maybe before we go on and talk about specifically around innovation and creativity and all that good stuff, could you tell us a little bit about Mojoco and why did you actually set it up in the first place?
Absolutely, I can. I was actually, it was about 13 years ago, well, almost 13 years to the day, actually, when I was with AbbVie as European Innovation Director. And the VP sort of came to me and said, Jill, you've been doing this role for a time now. Maybe you should be moving on and broadening experience and doing something else in the organisation. What else would you like to do and explore? And I had this sort of moment of clarity, Shirley, when I just went, I actually don't want to do anything else other than live in the world of innovation. So that was sort of what fired me up to start Mojoco. And I spoke to her about it, and she was incredibly supportive. And I sort of said to her, I'd been preaching about bravery and curiosity and fresh thinking. And it was time, as I turned 50 at the time, to go, actually, I'm going to do this now and I'm going to take the leap. So that was it. That's how I started Mojoco at the time.
Fantastic. And I mean, your passion for the subject, I have to say, is absolutely infectious. But can you tell me about the work that you do? So I know you work with leaders, particularly in the pharma space and, all the industries adjacent to that. What are you seeing in relation to how organizations are fostering creativity and innovation or not?
Yeah, no, it's such a good question, and it varies across the different companies, across different sectors. But I think the pattern that I see is that leaders love the thought of innovation. But what they hate is the thought of risk aversity and everything that comes with it. So this sort of dichotomy of the push and the pull. We really need to innovate, but we've got such tight deadlines, we've got such small budgets, we've got such compliance challenges around us that we can't really do it. And so in that case, it tends to become a little bit sanitized, and that creativity tends to be a little bit dulled down. So I take sort of a different approach to it with
Hmm.
leaders and sort of talk about how they lead for innovation to flourish, and to sort of forget about the processes that go around it, but lead the people for the behaviours that are required to let the creativity foster. And I find that the more that happens, the more innovation naturally occurs within the organisation.
Okay.
So rather than it being formalised, it sort of bubbles up from the bottom because you fire people up with that passion to
Yeah.
create and to enact change, really.
So what would that look like, Jill? So, I'm sure I think that risk point that you talk about is really interesting as sort of something that prevents or stifles, as you say, this creativity process and the innovation process. Like, what would it look like if I was a leader now and I'm saying, look, I want to build a more innovative culture, for instance? I know that's a big, wild statement, but what do you do with something like that when somebody says
Yes.
something like that?
And that's very often the brief that I get. We want to boost our innovation culture, Jill. Where do we begin? So I say, look for the pockets of passionate people that are within the organisation now. The truth is, organisations don't innovate, it's the people within them that innovate. So look for those passionate people that have become advocates and champions that almost sort of go and infect the
Hmm.
culture and the organisation. It has to start from the top. So I personally look for those leaders that are really passionate and that want to create and enact that change. And we get them together, we get them focused around a current pain point in the organization for a customer or an internal challenge, and we get them excited about that. And once you create that excitement and that focus, they tend to then look for the other areas that they can go and focus on and innovate around. And that sort of builds what I call their innovation muscle. They start to get a little bit more confident, a little bit stronger at doing this, and it begins to build and grow. So that's how the culture can really evolve very, very
Okay.
nicely.
And I'm conscious, Jill, I'm putting creativity and innovation together. And I'm just saying creativity and innovation, but they're not the same. Sure, they're not.
No, absolutely. Creativity is all about dreaming up ideas, and we can all be creative. We can all go to our fridge and say, what are the ingredients? What am I going to make? Well, apart from me, because I can't cook, but most people. And we're all creative every single day. Innovation is about putting that creativity to work for impact in the world. So it's really where you take your ideas and you create something from them, which creates a change, a value, and impact for whatever it is your focus is on. So creativity is dreaming up ideas, innovation is really extracting the juice and the value from them to create an impact.
Okay, and it was funny when you were saying that anybody can be creative, and I think there's might be some people who might dispute that. But is it because we're not actually doing the right thing to draw out that creativity, if you know what I mean? Like, can we all be creative? Actually, is I think the question.
I inherently believe everyone is creative, but we sort of put creativity on a pedestal and say, well, you're creative if you're an artist or you're a
Mm,
writer or you're in these, you have a creative hobby of some sort. But when you break creativity down, it's really about problem solving. And we have to do that every single day of our life. We may be creative. Google Maps may go down and we'll get creative about how you reach your destination. So
mhm.
we're creative, but we just don't sort of internalize that or think about it in the way that, oh, that means that I'm creative. We all have that juice and that spark within us. So it's tapping into it and sometimes just peeling back the layer and showing people that's you being creative. They go, wow, never knew I could do that.
Yeah, yeah, and I've had the very good fortune of seeing you in action, I have to say. And just one of the things I was taken in it with was the concept of ideation, and this whole sense of, when you have a group of people actually, really drawing out some of the ideas without them feeling encumbered in any way by anything. So could you just talk us through how you might do that? Because I thought that was just great, actually.
Well, I think there is a tendency, a natural reticence with some people to share ideas. We can all
Okay.
have ideas and we all dream up ideas. So when you facilitate an ideation session, I like to make sure that you have sort of stripped out any judgment from it as well, that it is a safe space to really share any of those ideas, even the wild ones. So I tend to start with the wild ideas and get people to be really playful. When we tap into that playfulness, we can then feel more unencumbered to share some of our thoughts and dreams and aspirations. What happens is, as intelligent, smart adults, we tend to apply logic and reason to our ideas before we share them. Well, that won't work, or we've tried that before, or somebody will think that's stupid if I say it. And you suddenly give people this freedom, you liberate them to say, just say anything, get it out there.
Yeah.
Ideas, and particularly in the early stages, are like these little seeds. You don't know as you plant a seed whether it's going to be a weed or something amazing. And if you pluck it too soon and say, that won't work, we've tried it, we won't get the budget,
Yeah.
that won't get past compliance, you never know whether it will or it won't. But you give
Mm,
it a space to grow and to build before you actually pass judgment on it. So it's really important that you have the right behaviors in the room. You have a facilitator that can make sure that every voice is heard
mhm.
and that you're capturing fully formed ideas rather than thoughts. And that's what
Yeah.
happens when we often brainstorm. We throw it all down and nothing ever happens.
Yeah.
So focusing on one idea and building it is super important.
And Jill, just as you're talking there, I'm thinking about groupthink, and even in sessions like that, where you have the most dominant voice, or you have the person who's doing most of the thinking, and I think you use this where you often you might get people to put their own ideas first down on post-its rather than somebody, a dominant voice in the room, that works better, doesn't it? Do you think? Yeah.
Absolutely. And we sort of call that the first burst. We get people to go, whatever is in your head, doesn't matter, there's no judgment, put it out there and put it up and give it some airspace. And it's amazing what happens when you do that and you put it on post-its or whatever around the room. It starts to trigger other people's thinking. Or you find two that are a little bit similar and it goes off in a tangent to something third that is quite amazing. And if you don't get people to do that, everybody sort of sits looking at each other, well, who's going to go first and what's going to happen? And, I don't want to be the first to say an idea because people might shoot it down. So
And one thing you mentioned just earlier on that prompted me to think about failure. How do you manage failure in these situations? Where you're trying to encourage innovation in organizations or people to be creative. What would you do, Jill? How do you deal with that?
I sort of reframe the word failure. It's very trite, isn't it? There is no failure, there's only learning. But actually, that word failure is so loaded with judgment that the sooner we can take away that word and replace it with things that are more meaningful for your business. I mean, I work with an organization, they banned the word failure and they just call them bloopers. And
Okay.
bloopers, it's just like, we learned something. The,
Yeah.
the key when you're innovating and you're trying something out, it's always going to be risky. Whatever you do, you don't know whether it's going to work for sure or not. But the thing is to try something in a small, safe way first and then de-risk it as you grow and you explore that idea a little bit more. So you're sort of de-risking your chance of failure. And if you are failing, you're failing in a small way, you're learning from that, you're iterating and you're building onto something that is, has a better chance of success in the world.
Yeah. And when you think of companies that you've worked with who, let's say, have, this is the wrong word, but I was going to say who've almost systemized innovation, almost, that it's kind of become part of the culture. What's the magic ingredient, do you think, there in
Oh,
those
there's
types of
there's
organizations?
quite a few magic ingredients, and it's not the systems or the processes or the supporting structures. It's the passionate people that keep it
Okay.
alive. And that is so important to make sure that innovation just isn't seen as a department or a person, that it's seen as a habit in the organization and is embedded in the way that we just work every day. I think
Hmm.
it's the worst thing is when there's an innovation department. That's not my job, that's their job. So it's everybody's job to innovate, and that's what keeps it alive in the organization.
Okay. Generative AI and technology. And I'm just wondering where your head is at in relation to Gen AI in terms of either supporting or stifling innovation in organizations or creativity. What's your view? What's your thoughts, Jill?
I think it's, you can paint it as, the villain in the piece of
Mm,
innovation because innovation is human centered, but actually it has a really important supporting role. It can help trigger our brains to spark new ideas. I work with some teams who use AI to put in their problem and
yeah,
ask, AI to reframe the problem. So that's really one way. It just gives you some new language that maybe you hadn't thought of to reframe and look at that problem in a different way. I've got teams that use AI to generate wild ideas. What's the wildest, wackiest thing I could do to solve this problem? It's a starting point. It's a jumping off point. It can act as a springboard. Other teams use it to, look for different sources of insight. Where could I go? Who else has had a problem a bit like this? Where do you suggest that I might look to get some learning about it? So it can really supplement and complement what we're doing. It will never replace it, but
yeah,
it certainly sort of frees up our brain capacity in some way to maybe be even more creative because it'll
yeah.
spark something.
So that's great. So you'd be quite hopeful about it in terms of it being a tool to
Absolutely.
support.
Absolutely, absolutely. I think we just need to engage with it in the right way, leverage it as a force for good rather than a force for evil. If all we're doing is give me the solution to this and plug it into AI and just going
Hmm.
and doing what it says, that's not going to be particularly great for you. So
Yeah,
there has to be this sort of hand in hand, and we're growing and learning every day about the power and what it can do for us. So
yeah, fantastic. Just one thing I just want to loop back on a little bit when you were talking about having like the head of innovation or the chief innovation officer or whatever the appropriate title is for somebody like that. You're not a fan of that, I
Not
understand.
particularly, no, no. I know when I took on my role as innovation director, I was very clear that shouldn't be a role that was there forever.
Right.
That it was there to embed the innovation culture, to set up a structure around how we would work with champions and how we would train people and how we would onboard people into our way of working around
Yeah.
innovation in the organization. And that role should disappear over time because there would be no need for
Mhm.
it. I think that's really important in the early stages, but longer term, for it to be sustainable, it has to be part of everybody's job.
I see. And when we think of innovation as a cultural piece, because you see many organizations with, the value or, the behavior is, about innovation or creativity or whatever it is. And what will be the enabler of that in an organization? I know you said it would be, let's say champions and leadership sponsors. Is there anything else within the organization? Because are there any? I know we talked a little bit about systems there earlier on, but is there anything that you've seen in organizations where it stays top of the agenda, that it never falls off, if you know what I mean, that we're always working in this innovative way? Anything you see particularly that works very well?
I think the behaviors that are really important. So there's sort of three things that are really important. There's the structures, so the tools and the processes we have. There's the leadership around innovation, and then there's the behaviors that everybody exhibits. So when any one of those three are not working really, and I call it sort of the beating heart of innovation within an
Okay.
organization, do a pulse check on that and find out how we're doing across those three areas. When any one of those three is out of kilter, it's likely to sort of wither a little bit. It's not just keeping good organisational health, it's exactly the same for innovation. So the most important one is the behaviours, it's how we show up every day.
Okay.
It's how we, and a structure for if we've got a problem, are we just jumping to the first solution, or are we really applying those behaviours of maybe being playful around it, or really asking questions around it, or exploring some fresh thinking around
Hmm.
this to make it a little bit more innovative in our approach so that it's our solution is more sustainable and brings more value.
And where you have organizations that may be highly regulated, and obviously pharma can be highly regulated, or where you might have functions that their job is regulatory, so it could be compliance functions. Is there space still for innovation within those type of functions?
And what I found, and commercial teams will never believe this unless they actually experience it themselves, but some of the sort of departments or functions whose role is to regulate the organisation can be some of the most innovative and creative people within the organisation.
Hmm.
So I work a lot with quality and regulatory and legal teams. They are the first ones to dive in and go, actually, we can see ways that we can operate around this. And we've been living with this problem of this regulation. And there's ways that not we can get around it, but we can mitigate for it, or
Yeah.
we can look at this in a different way. Whereas other teams go, well, we're just using that as the barrier in the organisation because legal will never make that
Hmm.
happen, or regulatory won't. And when I have sort of functional innovation sprints and I bring all the functions together, so the commercial team sort of sit back and go, wow, God, legal's been really useful in this process. Or, God, I never thought regulatory would go, actually, you can do this. So it can be a real eye opener. But we have this mental block to go,
Yeah.
that's the reason why. It becomes the excuse why we can't rather than the enabler is why we can.
And Jill, as you're talking, I'm struck by the fact that, workshops like what you're talking about there, activities like what that you're describing there, not only are the outcome or the output is around innovation, but it's all the process that's being created around people just being more collaborative and working across functions to solve a common client or problem, internal problem, whatever. I mean, isn't that sort of the byproduct almost of what you're
Yeah,
talking about?
yeah.
Yeah.
Because everybody in their function, they get into their river of thinking, they see their world as is, and that's how life is, and that's my reality. Once you get people working together, you get them seeing different perspectives, and that triggers their brain to look at different possibilities and make connections that maybe other people haven't seen. So that's the really important part of getting people from different with different lenses across the same problem that they may
Hmm.
not even be associated with that problem. That problem may not even affect them.
Yeah.
Actually, they have something really valuable. So we call it the naive expert. I'm not an expert in this, but I've got some fresh thinking that will help you. And that's very often why teams and how teams can come together to create some magic.
That's great. That phrase, the naive expert, it's something to embrace rather than, to feel non-contributory. One of the things at a geopolitical level, I suppose, is the whole focus, for the wrong reasons, on diversity and inclusion, within organizations, and where I suppose there's a lot of concern around that whole piece. When it comes to innovation and really driving innovation, and I know you'd have worked across different cultures as well, how important is that piece?
It's so important. It's back to my point earlier. The diverse perspectives, our diverse experience, our diverse references that we've had through life all inform how we look at things. And when we can bring people together that have very different viewpoints, it creates this magic that our brains are just wired so beautifully to make connections that maybe other people can't see. And when we can throw
Hmm.
that into the mix and work together, it's the best thing. I mean, the worst thing is when I work with an organization and they say, we have this particular problem, and so it's sales, and it has to be this team, and it has to be that team, and it has to be these sort of people, or it has to be that country that's involved in this. And I go, let's just throw that out and
Hmm.
let's look at who are the weirdest people that we could get involved in this. Because you've just mentioned all the normal, obvious people. Who are the deep experts? Who are the normal, and who have a bit of a weird connection to this? And so that encourages these diverse groups to come together to problem solve. And that is amazing. I mean, I've had one group recently working with an organization that's gone out to interview tattoo artists around a problem that they're doing around communication internally. And it's been
Really? I mean, that
amazing.
sounds fascinating.
It's amazing, absolutely amazing what they came back with. Not only did they come back with these amazing insights from talking to tattoo artists and
Yeah.
hanging out with them for a couple of hours, they actually came back really fired up to solve the problem that was actually quite a boring problem internally that people had struggled with. So not only does it, spark something, you actually learn an amazing amount from it.
Yeah. And can you share with us what industry those people would have been in who actually went out to the tattoo artists?
They were
What
in the pharma industry.
pharma industry? Right. Okay. Gosh, isn't that so? That's
I
very
know, just
different.
a little pushing and a little nudging.
Yeah.
I go, who else? Where else? And somebody went, well, when you get a tattoo, you're sitting with that one person, maybe for a few hours, and you've got this intimate relationship with them because you're actually doing something on their skin and you're having this physical contact with them. I wonder how those conversations go. And I just go and find out.
Fantastic.
Three people that went and they came back completely fired up. None of them had a tattoo. But they came back without a tattoo, but with amazing insights for how communication can work and how you can get a bit more intimate in the way in which you communicate. So,
That's fantastic. I really love that now, I must say. When you were talking about inclusivity and diversity, I'm always thinking, particularly in the innovation space and creativity, I'd just be interested, Jill, in terms of intergenerational, because I know a lot of parents who are listening to this might be concerned about their children who are spending more time on devices. Are you seeing any of that into the corporate world, where you're seeing any differences?
absolutely. I remember when I took on the role as innovation director, and we had somebody come in from a consulting agency, and they sort of blandly said, anybody over the age of 30 can't innovate. And myself and my VP at the time, who was nearly 60, both sort of looked at this person and sort of had
Hmm.
to differ. And so there are these huge judgments. Just as we make judgments on people of a certain age, on the older spectrum, we'll make judgments about, the younger generation always being on devices and being super connected and less socially, connected to one another in person. And I think there is a fear that that judgment can become a reality, or that perception can become a fulfilled reality. And the more we believe that, the more it will become a self-fulfilling prophecy. So I think we have to be really careful of these sweeping judgments. I know lots of teenagers that are not connected to devices, that are
Hmm.
not on social media, but we tend to have this preconceived idea that everybody, it was painting the brush very broadly and going, everybody's
Yeah.
doing this. I think the most important thing, if you have a child that you feel is maybe more connected than you'd like them to be, I think it's about seeing what they're doing when they're online. Are they gaming? Is that their output for their creativity? How
Hmm.
are they, and that creativity is just being harnessed in a different way. It's finding outlets to harness that creativity, maybe in a more social way. I was talking to someone, I have ADHD, so I'm on the neurodiverse spectrum, as
Okay.
you probably guessed, because I talk forever. And I was talking to somebody at the weekend, and she has a younger son who has ADHD. And he spends all his time gaming, and he's in his room, and he's never talking to people. What do we do? And so there was a group of us there, and they said, well, there are gaming clubs and there are coding camps, and get him out to engage in the thing that's really his passion, but find other ways of engaging them sort of more socially, and in that human to human rather than sort of
Hmm.
online way. And that can be quite liberating as well. So it's tapping in. All of our brains work in very different ways, just as generational brains work differently. Um,
Yeah.
I think it's just about harnessing them and seeing what the creative potential is there.
And Jill, as a neurodiverse person yourself, you must be able to understand, I suppose, the opportunity that exists around bringing that neurodiversity in the workplace. And sometimes we don't know how to do it. Let's be honest, we don't know how to deal with people who may be neurodiverse. Have you any tips for organizations? Because I do think this is a really important topic.
It is absolutely. And for years, I mean, I've only been diagnosed for the past couple of 2, 3 years. And so I'd worked in corporate life, not realizing that the reason I felt I didn't really fit in and that the workplace really wasn't set up for me until a few years ago. And now I suddenly go, that's why I found the transition to open workspace is so difficult. So,
Hmm.
so difficult because of the constant distractions. And I'm like, I can't focus. Well, I can't focus anyway, but that focus was just really impossible. So I think we have to, and we are getting better at making sure the environment works
Right.
for people that are neurodiverse. And we're finding better ways of tapping into the superpowers that neurodivergent people can offer in the workplace as well. So I think the future is bright on that front.
Very good.
Thankfully, the days are gone from, when I grew up in corporate life, where it was just one environment that suited everybody. We're a little bit more flexible now.
Yeah, very good. So, Jill, I hate to bring this conversation to an end, but I do have to. And I suppose just as a sort of when a reflection almost from yourself, just in terms of, again, I suppose, advice for leaders, who might be saying, look, I've got a team of people and, we're just not generating the different solutions, that we might need to be successful, to be effective, to be efficient, whatever it is. Have you any particular advice for leaders like that? Where do they start?
I've got a ton of advice for them. The first and most important thing is if you're struggling with a problem and your team maybe isn't coming up with the ideas that you think are maybe a little bit new and a little bit different, and maybe we're finding it struggling to get us together to do it, I would say look at the environment in which you're trying to do that. Is it your typical boardroom? Is it always in the office? Maybe get out of the office, go for a walk and talk with people, go to a tattoo artist.
Yeah.
But go and explore other worlds where people are
Yeah.
having this problem and seek out places where you can spark ideas. If I ask you, Shirley, where do you have your best ideas? You'd probably say it's not on a Wednesday afternoon just after I've cleared my email, or in that boardroom when somebody suddenly stands up there and says, have ideas about X, Y, and Z. We'll have it in the morning, or when we're in the shower, or when we're socializing with friends, or when we're out in nature going for a walk. So, as a leader, I think it's about engaging your team in new ways, in new environments. And that would be my one big tip. Get them out of the office, get them
Yeah.
out of that environment, go and get some fresh air and fresh thinking.
And I think we can all relate to that, Jill, just in terms of where do we find ourselves thinking. And I hate to say mine is when I'm actually drying my hair, which isn't terribly, it's not terribly exciting, is it? But it's,
Mine's when I'm ironing, Shirley.
yeah. Oh dear. But Jill, listen, that's been fantastic. Thank you so much. And it's just really, really interesting talking to you. And as I said, your passion for this particular topic is very, very evident, and it's just so important, and just some really great tips for leaders there who are listening into the conversation. So Jill, thank you very much indeed.
Thank you, Shirley, and thanks for the opportunity for me to talk all about innovation.
And I want to thank you, our listeners, too. I suspect you've come from very different parts of the globe and from within different industries also. And I hope that you have found the discussion as insightful and as thought-provoking as I did. By the way, if you'd like to contact me, you can do that on LinkedIn or on shirleykavanagh.com. To our listeners, I hope this has been as useful to you as it has been for me.